Here is something that most people will never admit to themselves. You are reading this right now, but part of your mind is somewhere else entirely. Maybe it is running through tomorrow's to-do list. Maybe it is replaying a conversation from 3 days ago. Maybe it is quietly calculating everything that could still go wrong this week. And what is interesting about that, what is genuinely fascinating from a psychological standpoint, is that you have probably spent more time thinking about moments that do not exist than actually living inside the ones that do. That is not a criticism. It is one of the most well-documented patterns in all of human psychology. In 2010, Harvard psychologists Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert published a landmark study in the journal Science. They tracked over 2,000 people throughout their daily lives using real-time smartphone data, and what they found was extraordinary. People were mentally absent from whatever they were currently doing approximately 47% of the time. Nearly half of all waking hours spent somewhere other than the present moment. And here is the detail that should stop you cold. The data showed that when a person's mind was wandering, they reported lower levels of happiness, regardless of what they were actually doing. It did not matter whether the activity was pleasant or neutral or even tedious. When the mind left, the happiness dropped. Let that land for a moment. You could be doing something enjoyable, something you actively chose to do, and if your mind drifted away from it, you felt worse. Not because the activity changed, because you left. So the real question is this: why do we keep leaving? And what exactly does it cost us when we do? To understand that, you need to understand something about how the human brain was built. Your brain was not designed to make you happy. It was designed to keep you alive. And keeping an organism alive for most of human evolutionary history required constant forward scanning, anticipating threats, planning contingencies, imagining worst-case scenarios before they arrived. The psychologist Rick Hanson, drawing on decades of neuroscience research in his book Buddha's Brain, describes this as the brain's negativity bias. The brain learns from danger faster than it learns from safety. It holds onto fear more efficiently than it holds onto joy. This was a brilliant design for surviving in an environment full of physical threats. It is considerably less useful when the threat is an unanswered message on your phone. But the brain does not distinguish between those two kinds of danger. It responds to anticipated social or professional problems with many of the same neural mechanisms it uses for genuine physical threat. It runs simulations, worst-case narratives, defensive rehearsals for conversations that may never happen. And in doing so, it consumes real, irreplaceable minutes of your one actual life preparing for problems that, in most cases, will never arrive. There is a network in the brain called the default mode network. Neuroscientists at Washington University, led by Marcus Aurelius, first described it in research published in 2001. What they found was that when people are not focused on any specific external task, a particular constellation of brain regions automatically activates. This network is your brain's narrative engine. It generates your sense of self across time. It weaves together memories from your past and projections about your future into a continuous story about who you are. And while that capacity is genuinely remarkable, it also means that when your attention is not anchored to something specific in front of you, your brain defaults to constructing stories about what happened, about what might still happen, about who you were and who you might become. Your mind wanders not because you lack discipline. It wanders because that is its default operating mode. The Stoic philosophers understood something about this more than 2,000 years before neuroscience could map the neural circuits behind it. Marcus Aurelius, writing privately to himself in what would become the Meditations, returned again and again to a single core recognition. He wrote that a person lives only in this present moment, that the past is already gone and the future has not arrived. and that the only place where any human being holds genuine power is right now, in this breath, in this action, in this choice. What makes that observation remarkable is not simply its wisdom. It is its source. Marcus Aurelius was the emperor of Rome. He faced constant warfare, political threats, recurring plagues, and the deaths of multiple children. And still, this man had to remind himself daily to return to the present. Because even for him, the mind kept pulling away into what had already happened and what might still go wrong. That pull is not a personal weakness. It is universal, and it begins earlier in life than most people recognize. Developmental psychologists who study early childhood describe what they call absorbed presence in very young children. Toddlers between the ages of 2 and 3 years old live almost entirely within immediate sensory experience. A cardboard box is endlessly fascinating. A patch of mud is worthy of prolonged investigation. Rain on a window is genuinely astonishing. There is no mental hierarchy of what matters more. There is no internal clock counting down to the next obligation. There is only what is here, and it is completely sufficient. Then, gradually, something changes. Well-meaning adults begin directing children's attention forward. This moment is preparation for the next. Today is practice for tomorrow. Kindergarten matters because of first grade. First grade leads to second grade. The child is carefully and consistently trained to evaluate the present not by what it contains, but by what it leads to. And by the time that child reaches adulthood, they have become remarkably skilled at mentally living somewhere other than where they actually are. By midlife, many people encounter what researchers who study life narrative and identity describe as an arrival paradox. They reach the destination they were taught to work toward. The stable career, the financial security, the relationship milestones. And instead of the satisfaction they expected, they find a strange, quiet hollowness. A sense that something was promised and has not been delivered. The future they spent years building toward has finally arrived, and it feels, more or less, the same as everything that came before it, because the feeling they were waiting for was never stored in the future. It was only ever available in the present moments they kept moving through without fully inhabiting. This is what certain philosophical traditions describe as the illusion of the horizon. You walk toward the line where the earth appears to meet the sky. You walk your entire life toward it, and it remains exactly as far away as the day you began, because the horizon is not a location. It is a perceptual feature of the observer. It moves as you move. The future operates identically. When tomorrow comes, it does not arrive as the future. It arrives as today. And a new tomorrow immediately appears ahead of it. A person can spend an entire lifetime in motion toward that line and never once stop to notice that the ground beneath their feet was always right here. Now let us examine anxiety specifically, because this is where the scientific evidence becomes particularly striking. Anxiety, at its neurological core, is a mismatch between where the brain is directing its attention and where the body actually exists. The body is always in the present moment. The anxious brain is almost perpetually in the future. It is running threat simulations, computing probabilities of negative outcomes, rehearsing defenses against events that have not occurred and, in the overwhelming majority of cases, never will. Research published in the journal Psychological Science found that approximately 91% of worries reported by people who struggle with anxiety did not come true. 91%. And in the 9% of cases where something genuinely difficult did happen, people consistently found the actual experience more manageable than their anticipation had led them to expect. Consider what that means in terms of the real economy of a human life. All the mental energy, the disrupted sleep, the physical tension stored in the jaw and shoulders and chest, the low-grade dread that follows you from room to room, all of it deployed against threats that do not exist in 9 out of 10 cases, And in the one case where something hard does arrive, the worry did not soften the blow. It only meant the suffering began earlier. You paid the emotional cost twice, once in imagination and once in reality. The neuroscientist Daniel Siegel, in his book Mindsight, offers a framing that is worth holding onto. He argues that the brain's predictive capacity is a tool, not an identity. It is something the brain does as part of its normal functioning. It is not what you fundamentally are. And when a person becomes fused with that predictive machinery, when the simulation of future threats becomes the dominant mode of experiencing life, they lose access to what Siegel calls presence, which he defines not as a passive or empty state, but as a richly activated, receptive form of awareness in which the immediate texture of experience becomes fully available. And the thing worth recognizing is that you have already been in that state. You know exactly what it feels like. Think about the last time you were genuinely absorbed in something, a piece of music that silenced your internal monologue entirely, a conversation so alive and specific that an hour passed without your noticing. A moment of unexpected beauty that made you pause mid-step. A child saying something that caught you completely off guard and made you laugh from somewhere deep and real. In those moments, the narrative mind went quiet. The mental timeline of past and future dissolved. What remained was simply what was there, immediate and complete. The psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi spent several decades studying this phenomenon systematically. He named it flow and defined it as a state of optimal experience in which a person is fully immersed in an intrinsically meaningful activity operating at the edge of their current capability. In this state, self-consciousness falls away. Time distorts, performance rises, and across thousands of interviews conducted over many years in cultures around the world, people described their experiences of flow as among the most alive and meaningful they had ever felt. Not because something extraordinary came at them from outside, but because they were fully inside the moment. And that turned out to be enough. What flow research tells us, among other things, is that presence is not an achievement reserved for advanced meditators or spiritually accomplished people. It is a neurological state available to any ordinary human being in any ordinary moment. And it is most naturally accessible not when we are aggressively trying to force ourselves into it, but when we stop actively working to be somewhere else. This is where much of the advice typically given about mindfulness quietly undermines itself for many people. Because the moment you turn presence into a goal to be pursued, you recreate precisely the same future-oriented mental movement that pulled you away from the present in the first place. Now you are reaching for presence the way you reached for every other milestone. It becomes another destination, another rung on the same ladder you were already climbing. The psychologist Tara Brach describes this as the trance of doing, a compulsive forward-leaning quality that infiltrates even our most deliberate attempts to rest. We go on vacation and photograph the view instead of watching it. We sit down to meditate and spend half the session evaluating how well we are meditating. The doing mind cannot stop doing, even when the explicit task is stillness. What actually makes a difference is not a new technique. It is a genuine recognition. The philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote in the 17th century that most of humanity's difficulties stem from the inability to sit quietly in a room alone. He was pointing at the same discomfort. The present moment, stripped of forward momentum and backward analysis, can feel uncomfortably still. And we fill that stillness immediately with noise, because stillness confronts us with what we actually are, right now, without a project or a destination to give us shape. But underneath that discomfort is something the noise has been covering over for a very long time. Consider what is happening in your body right now, as you read or listen to this. Your lungs are expanding and contracting without a single conscious instruction from you. Your heart is beating at a rate precisely calibrated to your body's current needs. Your visual system is processing millions of incoming data points every second, assembling them seamlessly into a coherent and stable world. Your immune system is actively working on your behalf in ways you will never directly perceive. None of that is waiting for your management. Something with extraordinary intelligence is keeping you alive this very second, without any help from you. And it has been doing so through every single moment you have ever lived, including every moment you were too preoccupied with tomorrow to notice. William James, widely regarded as the founding figure of American psychology, wrote near the end of his life that the greatest revolution of his era was the discovery that human beings could alter their lives simply by altering their mental attitudes, not their external circumstances, not their future outcomes, their relationship to what was already present. The present moment is not a destination you reach after sufficient effort. It is not a reward you earn after completing enough self-improvement work. It is the only place you have ever actually been. Every experience that has ever mattered to you happened in a present moment. Every feeling of genuine connection, every moment of real laughter, every time something struck you as beautiful or true or worth having. All of it happened here in exactly this kind of moment which is available to you right now. You did not miss parts of your life because you were not trying hard enough. You missed them because you were trained very early and very thoroughly to always be arriving somewhere else. That training is deep, but it is not who you are. Right now in this moment you are here. That is not a small or ordinary thing. That is the whole thing. The only question worth sitting with is a simple one. Are you willing to notice?